Coffee was brought to Europe by an Italian monk named Luca de' Medici. He brought it back to Italy in 1630 after a long journey that started in Ethiopia. But how did he get there? Did he walk or ride an animal? How long did the trip take? And why did he decide to bring coffee back to Italy in the first place? Let's find out. Welcome to my channel. Join me and my two friends as we travel through time and space to answer all of your burning history questions. Today we're going to travel to 17th century Europe and Ethiopia to find out how coffee got there. To understand how coffee made its way from Ethiopia to Europe, we need to start with how coffee beans are picked, processed, and shipped. Coffee is made from the seeds inside coffee cherries, which grow on coffee trees. The coffee cherries have to be picked by hand because if you pick them too early, then the seeds won't be ripe and the coffee will taste bad. When they're ready, they can be picked and put into sacks to be taken to a processing factory where they can be sorted. The good cherries are separated from the bad ones, and then they're washed and pulped. Once the pulp is removed, they're put somewhere dry for a few days to let the beans ferment. After fermentation, they're cleaned again, dried and sorted one last time before being sent to be roasted and turned into coffee. Now that we know how coffee gets processed, we can travel back to 1630 and follow Luca de' Medici's journey. We'll start in Ethiopia, where it's believed that coffee was discovered. One day, an Ethiopian goat herder named Kaldi noticed that his goats were more energetic after eating some red berries. Intrigued by this observation, he decided to try the berries himself, and soon enough, he felt energized as well. He shared this discovery with the monks at a nearby monastery, and soon enough, everyone was drinking coffee. This is just a legend, though. There's no evidence to prove that coffee was really found by a goat herder. It could have been used long before then. In fact, there's evidence of people drinking coffee in Yemen as far back as the 15th century. But that's a story for another time. Anyways, once the coffee berries were picked, they would be taken to a port city called Mocha. This was the main port for exporting coffee in the Middle East at the time. From Mocha, the coffee beans were transported across the Red Sea to Egypt, and from there, they were shipped north into the Mediterranean. Now this is where our story picks up. In 1630, Luca de' Medici was an Italian monk who lived in a monastery in Italy. At this time, European countries were fighting a lot of wars with each other, and it was dangerous to travel around. So Luca decided to join the fight against the Ottoman Empire. His job was to look after the merchants that sailed the Mediterranean so they could trade safely. The Ottoman Empire controlled most of the Mediterranean at the time, so it was a very dangerous job. If the Ottomans caught him, they might have thrown him in prison or even killed him. One day, Luca and his crew stopped at a port in Egypt. This was probably Alexandria, since it was one of the biggest ports in the Mediterranean. While he was there, he met some merchants from Ethiopia who told him about a special drink called coffee. Apparently, it gave you energy and made you feel great. This piqued his interest, and he asked them to bring some back with them when they returned from their next trip to Ethiopia. They agreed and set sail back to Italy. When they arrived, Luca and the others were shocked. They had never seen anything like it before. It tasted like wine and was served in little cups. Everyone in the monastery wanted to try it. Soon enough, everyone was talking about the amazing drink they tried in Egypt. The news spread, and before long, everyone in Europe wanted some. So Luca and the merchants decided to go back to Ethiopia and get as much coffee as they could. But there was one problem. No one knew where to buy it. They couldn't just go to the grocery store and grab a bag of coffee beans. They had to find someone who grew it and convince them to sell it to them. Eventually, they found a farmer who agreed to sell them some beans. They bought as much as they could and set sail back to Europe. Once they arrived, they sold the coffee beans to anyone who wanted them. Soon enough, everyone in Europe was drinking coffee. That's why it's often said that Italy was the first country in Europe to drink coffee. However, there's some debate over whether or not this is true. Some historians say that the French were the first to drink coffee, but that's not important right now. What is important is that coffee spread throughout Europe thanks to Luca and the other monks. It took several trips for coffee to reach Europe. The first shipment probably arrived in Italy around 1630. That means that it took at least 3 years for coffee to get there. It probably took longer because the ships traveled during the summer months only. Back then, there were no refrigerators, so the coffee beans could spoil easily. Also, the ships had to sail around Africa because there was no Suez Canal yet. This made the journey even longer and riskier. The ships had to sail through the dangerous waters of the Indian Ocean, where they could be attacked by pirates. It's hard to imagine today, but back then, traveling was extremely dangerous. There were pirates everywhere, and if your ship was caught in a storm, you might be at sea for weeks. Sometimes the ships had to stop and wait for the wind to change direction. During these stops, the crew would have to stay on board while exploring the land. This was also risky because they could get attacked by natives or wild animals. Of course, there were no airplanes or GPS back then, so getting lost at sea was easy. Even if a ship made it to its destination, the crew could still lose all of their cargo due to storms, disease, or rodents. Traveling was hard work, and not many people wanted to do it. That's why sailors were paid a lot of money for their work. Luca and the other monks were lucky. They managed to bring coffee to Europe without losing any cargo. However, they didn't make much money from selling coffee. Most of the profits went to the farmers and merchants in Ethiopia. Now, let's talk about why coffee became so popular in Europe. When Europeans first started drinking coffee, it was considered a luxury good. Only the rich could afford it because it was expensive to import. But as more and more people started drinking it, the price dropped, and soon enough, everyone could enjoy a cup of joe. People loved coffee because it gave them energy and helped them stay awake. Back then, there were no street lights, so everyone had to go to bed early. But with coffee, people could stay up later and enjoy themselves. Coffee houses started popping up everywhere, and soon enough, everyone was talking about the latest news over a cup of coffee. As for Luca, he continued his work protecting merchants until he died in 1687. He might have been just a small part of history, but without him, who knows if coffee would have become so popular in Europe. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.